Boker Tov, Ari, and the folks in Orange County. I'm very happy to be able to, at least through this medium, get to have you know me, and hopefully in a relatively short period of time, another year or so, we will be actually meeting in person, and I look forward to that indeed. My name is Lydia Aisenberg, and I think the accent is a giveaway anyway that I am originally from Britain. I'm Welsh. If we're going to talk about nationalistic issues, then I must say I'm Welsh and not English or Scottish or Irish. And I've lived for the last 53 years here in this very beautiful valley known as the Jezreel Valley, in a kibbutz next door to Megiddo. The name of my kibbutz, Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, which translates actually to the guardian of the valley. And the valley that we're talking about, you can only see a small portion of here, is the Jezreel Valley. And this is a grand spot to stand in order to look at the map and to, through the map, understand much better what it is that we are physically looking at as we sweep from one side to the other. Here on the map, for instance, this is a map that, as you can see, the green line, the 1949 armistice line, has been drawn by hand and very roughly, and I certainly wouldn't take this verbatim for everything you see. Okay, on this map we can see more or less the course of the 1949 armistice line, better known these days, or more commonly known as the Green Line, although some Israelis actually also call it Kavatefa, which would mean the seam line. But this here has been drawn by hand, and therefore I would say it's done roughly, but it gives the idea immediately of the size of West Bank, Samaria, Judea, and at the same time the narrowness, terribly narrow, as we can see here, of the central part of the state of Israel until 1967. In actual fact, we're talking a distance from Netanya, at least to Tulkarem, of just a mere 15 kilometers. So hopefully you'll take time out to look at a good map and to understand possibly why some Israelis would say they're supportive of two states for two people and then say but. And that but is usually, but not go back exactly to 67, because they remember what it was to travel in this area, and in the mountains was sitting the Jordanian army. But now we're going to get back to my valley, the Jezreel Valley, and what it is that we can see from here. If we look on the map, we can see Tel Megiddo, which is of course where we are now, by Kibbutz Megiddo. And on the mountain range on the opposite side of the valley to us, which, by the way, if you had been here almost 100 years ago like the founder members of my kibbutz, this is certainly not what you would have been seeing. You would have been seeing swampland in the main. And this is truly the success story of what we call the Itchashvut, the settlement and the drying of the swamps, and turning this valley into what we can say a breadbasket valley of Israel. So let's go across the valley and to the mountain range opposite. We just barely make out some buildings on the top, but that actually is Nazareth, and I'm sure most of you, all of you, probably have heard of Nazareth, but certainly not in the context of, oh, let's get to know the map of Israel. So there we are, Nazareth, and if we move along, we see a rather cute, looks like a pudding bowl has been switched on its head, and that is actually Mount Tabor, or I believe in the States they call it Tabor. So Mount Tabor or Tabor. And then if we move across, we have yet another mountain range, and that's known as Givat HaMoreh, Teacher's Mountain, and at the base of which, a little bit too misty to actually see, but there are many high-rise buildings there, and that is the city of Afula. Then if we move across even more so, we are looking at yet another range of mountains, and that is Mount Gilboa. From the point where we are standing here, only the first two peaks are actually inside the state of Israel, because the green line comes down and separates those two on the left to the rest of the mountain range, which is today in the West Bank. I'm now actually holding the map more or less as we are. The sea, the coastline, would be to our left, and West Bank, as we can see here, to the right. And on this map, this is exactly where we are at the moment. As you can see, we're very close to the green line, and we are looking in that direction into the West Bank. And yet, if we swing round just a wee bit more, we can see many houses on yet another mountain range known as the Amir mountain range, and that is the city of el-Fahim, Israeli Muslim city of el-Fahim, which today at least 60,000, if not more, Arab Muslim citizens of the State of Israel are living. So just look at that sweep that we have done, going from places like Nazareth up on top of the hill, across the valley, Afula, to the Gilboa mountain range, looking into the West Bank and very close by a city, Palestinian, called Jenin. And as we're going to get closer to there, hopefully we'll get a better view. And then once more back and around to el-Fahim. Okay, so once more, a different place, totally different view, and I think very necessary to take a good look at the map that I'm holding in order to be able to explain in a way that one would understand so far away what it is we are looking at. First of all, we're standing above a border police base. The name of the border police base is Salem, and Salem is also right on the green line. And if we are to look just past the barbed wire and above, we can see very, very clearly the security fence. Now that security fence, from this angle in particular, we can see it passing, going around this base. On the right of it, we have an Israeli Arab Muslim city by the name of Salem, and then it goes up the beginnings of the Amir mountain range. Remember, we already mentioned before el-Fahim. el-Fahim, we can now see the highest peak of el-Fahim sitting up there amongst the clouds. That's Har Alexander is the name of that peak. And if we look a wee bit to the left, you can actually see the course of the fence. It's cut out, whitish, a road going around, and it's just past that point that it goes off the green line, because right across from the Gilboa mountain range, across the valley, and all the way that we can see here and up to el-Fahim, the security fence built exactly on the green line. Just past el-Fahim, it suddenly swings to the left and goes deeper into the West Bank. But we can also see from here, since 1981, the Jewish settlement of Cheinanit and the other Shaked, right up on top, on the brow of the hills there. Not so sure that in America one would say the brow of the hill, but on top of the lower part of the mountain range, we can just make out a few buildings, a line of trees. That's Cheinanit, and just past it, Shaked. 2 of 4 Jewish settlements up there, looking over this part, all Palestinian villages here to the left of the security fence, and from that vantage point where they are, on the other side, they can look right across the State of Israel out to the Mediterranean Sea. So where we started before was Tel Megiddo, and we just came over the main road here, Route 65, Vadiyara, and carried on just a very short distance indeed here to Salem. And on this map one can see the yellow on the map is actually the security fence. The green line obviously is the 1949 armistice line. We are standing here now right at this point. el-Fahim up on top of the mountain there, here, and exactly the point, as I mentioned before, that the fence goes off the green line and around the 4 Jewish settlements, and here are the 4 Jewish settlements, and of course it does not go back to the green line for a long way. And wedged in here are Palestinian villages as well as the Jewish settlements, and East Barta'a, which is a port of call, where we will be a wee bit later on. Once more we can see Har Tabor, but of course excuse me, from a different angle, because we were onto the left of it before at Megiddo. And we come down, we can see quite clearly from where we are right now, the high-rise buildings of Afula, and then the mountain range along that, which is Har Moreh. And if we move across, and very close to where we're standing, we see Palestinian homes in the village, and the golden dome and minaret of the local mosque there. And yet behind it we have a whole row of mushavim, which are Israeli agricultural villages known as the Tanachim. And so at this point we understand that that fence comes down the Gilboa mountain range, and if we move slightly across now, we can see the low peak and then the higher peak and then the highest peak, which are inside the state of Israel. But the green line and the fence become one, coming down over the mountain, around those Israeli mushavim, agricultural settlements in the main, and their fields, comes between them and the Palestinian village, around the village here to the left, and in front of us, and continues on to El-Fahim there, up on top of the mountain. And of course the Jewish settlements on the other side of the fence, as we already saw before. Now, all terribly complicated, and it's complicated enough when you're actually physically standing here and seeing and looking at a map and trying to figure things out. But to be halfway across the world and try and figure all of this out, you need to be looking at, and I'm sure you'll have that opportunity, of a darn good map that would put things better in perspective for you. However, let's try with what I have here. First of all, we have Afula. Here on the map, Afula and Tabor, over there. And we are actually literally standing here on the green line at the moment, looking into this tiny village. Well, it's actually got a lot larger lately, down below, Zabuba. And we move across again, we see the Gilboa Mountains. And then, if we swing around, and it's a bit hazy today, but look at the highest peak where I'm pointing to, and come down. That whole ridge is full of hundreds and hundreds of buildings. And that is Jenin, Palestinian autonomous city. And between Jenin and where we are standing right now are about 20 small Palestinian villages with lots of agriculture, as we can see immediately down below. Okay, I think it's rather important to mention, most people are under the impression that this is an electric fence, and it is not an electric fence. It is actually, the full title is an electronic surveillance fence. And electronics meaning, and surveillance meaning, cameras. So a certain number of those white poles that we can see along the fence are actually cameras, but there are also many other cameras that are very, very visible, like for instance, behind the tree here we can see a very tall tower and probably an extremely powerful camera sitting on top. But in most parts it is the fence with whatever electronic devices are there. So once again, I just want to get rid of this idea that it's an electric fence. I mean, you're not going to touch it and get curly hair for life. You're going to have to smile because you're going to be on camera. And that is the whole purpose. It's to be able to know what's going on over there in order, if it's something that we're not interested in happening, then we can stop it. And that seems pretty simple. But what does it mean for the people over there? What does it mean for the people over here? And here I'll be 100% candid. I've been fighting for 30 years, getting to know people, Palestinians, Israeli Arabs and Jews, and trying to listen to the stories of all, and trying to make up my mind what can be done in order to break down these terrible stereotypes that we seem to have, and each other, and so on and so forth. All regular conversation pieces that one would have. And so what does it mean? If today that fence was to be removed, would I, with all my activism and with all my contacts and people living down there and caring deeply about them, would I feel safe? in my bed tonight 7 kilometers in that direction in Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek? And the answer is a flat no. And I'm trying to share with you the emotional upheavals that we go with, you believe, you work towards, you want, you so want, but at the same time there are facts that work against, and I've just been as candid as I possibly can be. And that's how so many people feel. They wish for the day that they can join in removing this fence, which means we've done it. We've hit the nail on the head. We've got there, that we want to move forward together and have a peaceful existence. How many people my age group think they're going to see that in their lifetime? I think you can count them on one hand. And I'm bitterly disappointed, obviously. Do you give up? No. You do not give up. Because there are people over there who are working, and not working in a democratic environment. I can stand here and I can explain myself and no fear. You cannot do that over there. So we can't expect from them to come out in huge numbers demonstrating peace towards Israel when they know that could cost them dearly. We have to take all of this into consideration. And I know, and I'm pretty aware of the fact, I'm probably speaking to very young people, and I just hope that they'll understand sufficiently to know that every individual can make a difference, and that includes them. Okay, now we've arrived at a point where we get this phenomenal view over the Israeli Arab Muslim city of Fahim, where today it's close to 65,000 Arab Muslim citizens of Israel living here. And one can say that the last of the houses that we can see here on the right, on the hill, that is the last of the houses before the security fence, which is running on the green line in that area. But we're going to concentrate just for a moment on the city, because this city is the largest in the area known as Vadiyara. And Vadiyara, if we look, and I'm going to flip the map for a moment and say this is where we began at Salem. Having been at Megiddo, we came to Salem, and now we're here. We're in Fahim, which, as I explained before, is exactly the point where the fence goes off the green line deeper into the West Bank and around those 4 Jewish settlements. So we're now overlooking this city, Fahim. 65,000 Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, Arab citizens of Israel, Israeli Arab. These are all different ways that these folks describe themselves, although the youth, one can say today, will say Palestinian with Israeli citizenship. Vadiyara, from here to a point down to Pardes Chana, almost Karkor, there are Israeli Arab Muslim villages and small towns on either side of the road. The population today of what's also known as the Little Triangle is probably about 150,000. And it's a very important road indeed since biblical times, Route 65, as we see on the map here. So why did I want you to be introduced to this area too? Because we came just now from the Jezreel Valley down below, and that mountain range with Nazareth sitting on the other side. But from this point now we can sweep around and also see how close is Haifa. This is the Carmel mountain range that we can see here. And the Druze villages, for those of you who've been to Israel, I'm sure you went to visit one of the Druze villages on top of the Carmel, or Safia, or Dairet el Carmel. The white buildings on top there, that's exactly them. And lost in the clouds is actually the Haifa University, that rather tall building. And the buildings we see down below is a very quickly developing Israeli town called Yokneam. So we are now at the beginning of the area known as Vadiyara. We're very close to the village of Barta'a, the fence, the green line, and Barta'a, which I'll introduce you more to when we're physically there or get a view from above, is a village that in 1949 was purely and simply and tragically for the people living there divided by the green line. And part of that village ended up under the Jordanians, getting Jordanian citizenship, and part ended up, like these folks here, in the State of Israel and getting citizenship of the State of Israel. What is different about Barta'a to all other villages that I know is that one family. All of them are an extended family. The family name is Kabaha, and they're even brothers and sisters and parents and children ended up on either side of the line, which was really a vadi or a ditch going through. And I don't know of any other village that has the same story where they were all members of the same extended family. Once again, we're at a rather nice vantage point here at Katsir on the Amir mountain range, but to our immediate right, the Carmel range of mountains as it drops down towards Kibbutz Magan Michael and Jisr Zarka, and of course the coastline. If we come along the coastline, we come towards Hadera, and I'm not quite sure whether one can see or not, but there is, and it's not smoke, it's actually steam coming out of one of the 3 chimneys of the Hadera power station, which those who've been to Israel before might be familiar with, and that of course is near Caesarea. And then we are going to move down the coast a wee bit more around the other side of the trees and bushes here, and we can see the buildings of Hadera. And if we come closer inland, and it's really, you're talking a 15-minute journey in a car, we see the new city of Harish under construction. Already around 15,000 people are living there. It's going to be enormous when it's finished, and literally the last of the houses will be sitting on the green line as the plans are at the moment and what I've seen already constructed. But let's now go back to the coastline, and we go a wee bit further, and there's just one rather darkish building standing out against the clouds, but we can see a few more buildings, and that's already the beginning of Netanya. So there we have it. What a view. But if we move more now to the left, and this is what we're more or less dealing with today, and we see what actually looks like a road cutting across an open area, and that is actually not a road at all. It is the fence, the security fence, part of which we already saw in our previous stops. Okay, so let's have a recap. We're standing at the moment at Katsir on top of the Amir mountain range, and as I already described, we've been looking to see where the Carmel mountains drop into the Mediterranean. We've come along this road number 65 in the Vadiyara area and come up to where we are right now, marked with the arrow on the map here, and we're looking right across to Hadera. And if we also look down immediately below, the new city, not on the map yet, which is Harish. And then further down the coastline, and we can just make out a little bit here and there, Netanya. The clouds are really sitting on Netanya today. But where we see a large collection of buildings, that's already another of the Israeli Arab cities here in the Vadiyara area. It's known as Baka el Garbiya, and today there's at least 35,000 living there and have city status. And then if we just come inland a wee bit more, we can see over the tops of the bushes here what looks like a road, and in actual fact there is a tarmac road there, but it's alongside the security fence. So this is a continuation once more of what we were dealing with before, overlooking, and I'm going to flip the map at this point so that we can do a recap once more. We started here looking at Zabuba, the Palestinian village. We went along, we saw the point more or less of Al-Fahim where the fence diverts from the green line, the 4 Jewish settlements that are now behind us, and we are now here in Katsir. We've come in and out, and now at Katsir, overlooking, as we can see on the map, the divided village of Barta'a down below. We've got East Barta'a, and this is just to confuse you a wee bit more. We've got East Barta'a in the West Bank and West Barta'a in the State of Israel. If that doesn't confuse you, and I'm doing my best to do so, then I don't know what I can do. We're actually concentrating on Katsir today. About 700 families live in Katsir, and it's one of 7 new places that were started in the late 1980s by Ariel Sharon when he was the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure, wanting to try and encourage Israelis to move off their backsides from the overcrowded centre of the country and move not so far, a wee bit north. So how at the beginning could you encourage people to do so? Well, you gave them a piece of land for nothing and tax concessions, but eventually it has grown into a very successful place. Katsir, most of the families living here are Jewish, but they are from many different countries who've come to settle in Israel and built their own home. But as we swing the camera around, we go from the Jewish community of Katsir here inside Israel, and we're looking at the homes of Palestinians just a wee bit down below. This is the close proximity of West Bank Palestinians to a Jewish community inside the state of Israel. And if we look just between the two, the new buildings over here and many new buildings down below, there is a deep valley between here and over there. Where the greenery peters down, there's a deep valley, or a vadi as we would call it here. And that actually is what divided the village. If now it's possible, Uri, if you just come a wee bit closer to me and put your camera on the cars, the sun is reflecting on the glass, that is actually the main shopping centre of Barta'a today, but East Barta'a. East Barta'a in the West Bank. If we were to count 3 or 4 houses to the right, you are already in West Barta'a inside the state of Israel, because this ditch or vadi at the bottom of the hill where we're standing actually then comes from the bottom of this hill and diagonally cuts the other section of the village into 2. So they were sliced and became citizens of 2 different countries, the one family, in 1949 as a result of representatives of Israel and Jordan and Egypt sitting on the island of Rhodes and using a map to discuss and to define what would be an armistice line, known as the Green Line today, between the state of Israel and what today many people call West Bank, Judea, Samaria, which was going to be, of course, Jordan. Basically, from the vantage point where we are at the moment, we need to look at the village from above as being oval-shaped, somewhat like an American football. And 3/4 is in the West Bank. Only 1/4 is actually in the state of Israel. And we are going to go down to the village and to see where this ditch goes through, and hopefully be able to speak to a few people and find out what it meant for them. But basically 1949, let's go back to 1949, they draw a line. Those people did not come and see physically what it was they were doing. They used the map. The name of this village was not on the map. They went according to that deep valley, and that's how this came about. All the people living here, I don't believe there were more than 800, something like that, in 1949. All of them, the extended Kabaha clan, found themselves divided into 2 different countries. And what a terrible reality. They ended up in 2 different countries, getting different citizenship one from the other, and those 2 countries continuing to be in conflict with each other. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Barta'a. Presently we are on the Israeli side, in other words West Barta'a, inside the state of Israel. And if we take a look here, we can see there's quite a bit of activity. I have to say that under normal circumstances it's usually a lot busier, but we're still of course in the Corona time. And the mosque on this side, and alongside the mosque we have high school and middle school. So of course now we are down. Before I was talking from above, down there. Well, now we're down there, and we can of course swing around and see where it was that we were before and where we were speaking from. We can see very clearly here above the red roofed houses of Katsir. remember the 7 stars of Ariel Sharon, Jewish community inside the state of Israel. And on the other side of the divide, one can call it, that deep valley between the 2 hills, East Barta'a, today an Area B under the Palestinian Authority, which means, of course, that Israel has no responsibility whatsoever for health, education, the well-being of the people in any shape or form, but they, of course, do have the security fence a few kilometers behind them. They're in an area that I today call limbo land. They're not in the state of Israel. Israel has not annexed them and given them all Israeli citizenship or permanent residency like in East Jerusalem. They are Palestinian with Palestinian identity cards, Jordanian passports mostly still today, in the West Bank, but with the security fence behind them. I know that sounds really very complex, and it certainly is, as we've already discussed. Now, if we come over here, we see the mosque on the other side. I'm sure most of you have heard of that rather famous book, The Tale of Two Cities, and whenever I'm standing here I always want to say this is the tale of two mosques, because this is a mosque that is frequented by citizens of the State of Israel, and the mosque over there frequented by Palestinians in the West Bank. But it can be brothers going to the different synagogues. I said synagogues. I'm thinking of the Jews on the island, 3 Jews and 10 synagogues. That must be where my line of thinking is there. But in all seriousness, just think 2 brothers, but one lives in a house over there, one lives in a house over here. He has Israeli citizenship because his mother was in a house on this side, and the brother over there. So they go to these 2 different mosques that are in such close proximity, but one is inside the state of Israel and one across the Green Line, across that valley that became effectively a border, whether I want to call it an armistice line or not. It divided the people. I would call that a border. And that's what we see today. We only see a very small part actually of East Barta'a from the vantage point that we are right now, because it goes on and deeper into the West Bank. It's about 2 kilometers from here to the security fence, which is running behind them. It's expanding incredibly fast, and as we can see, it doesn't look too different from one side to the other. But of course, there are huge differences. So here we are on the Israeli side. This is the main road running through. And if we were to follow this road now, we can see there's a lot of traffic immediately down below. We would just go down, and when we get to that blue upper part of the building there, the ditch actually is going across from left to right between the hills, and then it divides the village like so. And that building, blue and white, is actually inside the state of Israel. Wow, blue and white. There you go. How nationalistic can you get? But look across the way and you'll see a building that's orange. Well, they're on the other side of the ditch, and they are Palestinian in East Barta'a, an Area B under the Palestinian Authority. Now, can you imagine if those happen to be 2 brothers or 2 first cousins? Because those situations did arise. That a brother would be facing a brother in 2 different countries, and those, of course, those countries continuing in a conflict. Such a gentleman, this guy, a real gentleman. Okay, we're now in the butcher shop of my really good friend Yosef Kabaha, of course, because everybody is Kabaha, and you mentioned Kulam Kabaha po. And we are in this shop that is actually physically on the Green Line. If we were just to look outside, unfortunately it's a little bit full of garbage, but that ditch exactly goes under the road at this point. However, let's ask Yosef, איפה אתה גר? פה או שם?
אני גר מזרח.
Okay, I'm asking, where do you live? Do you live on this side or do you live on that side? And of course you saw he pointed to the other side.
אבל תדעי לך, אנחנו משפחה אחת, אדמה אחת, ובתים אחד, ואני המשפחה שלי נמצאת בצד הזה.
And I have family on this side as well.
וזה האדמה של סבא שלי.
And my grandfather's land is also on this side.
ויושבים פה זה דודים שלי.
And uncles and cousins I have on this
יש חלק
side.
מהמשפחה שלנו שיצא בצד הזה בגלל שיש לנו עוד אדמה שם.
Okay, but we also have land on the other side, so of course some of the family is also on the other side of this rather noisy village, as we can hear.
אותה בזמן של אנגלית. הפרידו את הכפר. עשו חלק מצד הזה וחלק מצד הזה. ואנחנו נמצאים עכשיו, בשנת 67 נפגשו, פגשו את ההגדה ואנחנו נפגשנו עוד פעם וחיינו אותו דבר, שאנחנו משפחה אחת.
Okay, wow, that's a lot to translate, but Yosef basically is saying up until 1967 we were divided, and in 1967 we came together and we discovered that we are the same family, even though we have different relatives on either side, close relatives, not so, and of course land that is owned by the closer family on both sides. איך היום? How is it today? אנחנו עכשיו בזמן נורא קשה בגלל הקורונה, אנשים הפסיקו לבוא, להסתובב, מפחדים, הייתם בלי עבודה פה?
תראי, בזמן הקורונה אנחנו פתחנו את החנויות ועבדנו רגיל והיה לנו פה סגור.
During the corona, Yosef is saying that they were interested in doing the self-isolation at the beginning because they are a market, and a very large market, and people are coming from many places in Israel, and they wanted to be, that people would feel it would be safe. When it was time to open, that they would be safe. בוא נחזור למה שקורה פה היום, כי יש פה הרבה תנועה. I'm asking him to come back to what we can see now. There's a lot of traffic here, there are people buying. Has this gone back to normal? And what is normal? חזרתם לנורמליות פה? זה מה שרגיל? מה שאנחנו רואים פה עכשיו, אנשים...
אנחנו סגרנו,
אבל מה...
40 יום עשינו סגר. 40 יום עשינו סגר.
Okay, 40 days they were actually closed in self-isolation.
אדם יבוא זר לכפר.
We didn't let anybody that didn't belong here come here.
אבל כמה אנחנו יכולים להחזיק מעמד במצב כזה שאנחנו סגורים?
But how long could we economically keep this up and also not to be together? יוסף, אנחנו צריכים להמשיך, ואני רוצה להגיד לך שלום, ואני רוצה להגיד לך ולכל המשפחה שרק יהיה דברים טובים. וסתם, כמה אתה זוכר, כמה זמן אנחנו מכירים אחד את השני?
באמת אנחנו מכירים, אז אני לא זוכר בדיוק שנים, אבל אנחנו אז מכירים. ואני הכרתי אותך כמה הייתי יותר צעירה.
Yes, he actually knew me before I was coloring my hair with bottle, okay.
באמת אני התייחסתי אליך בתור ידידה טובה.
But you can't see how red my face is. But this gentleman, who really is a good friend and always so friendly and a real gentleman, is saying we've known each other for so many years that he doesn't exactly remember, but it is about 20, and that the good relationship is very important to him as it is to me. And this is what we hope more people will see, that it is possible. Sit and talk and open up and find you have so much in common. And at the end of the day, you have far more in common than you have differences. Love you.
Lydia, שתהיי בריאה מאוד.
Okay, so now here we are. We're actually, for me anyway, back home. This is Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek in the Jezreel Valley, which I introduced you to earlier on when we started our little tour of the Vadiyara region. And I've been living here now for 53 years. It's a Hashem Eretz Tza'ir kibbutz, which maybe some of you have heard of Hashem Eretz Tza'ir in the past. And I think one can say that it's a flagship of the Hashem Eretz Tza'ir movement. One of the founders of Hashem Eretz Tza'ir in Poland was one of the founder members of this kibbutz. A number of them actually were founder members of this kibbutz. And in a year or so we'll be celebrating the 100th anniversary of Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek. Of course, I mentioned earlier on that this valley that today we see the lushness of the agriculture here, that this was in those days when they first came, what can we say, no other word other than swamp, and they suffered from malaria. And if I was to deal with, as I hope I will in future meetings with you and hopefully in person, to explain to you Zionism through the eyes of the founder members of this kibbutz, and what we see today looks like paradise, and it actually is, but the amount of work, hardship gone into creating and to continue to develop has been over a period of 100 years, and let's not forget that. I do hope that you will have enjoyed learning about my valley and my village to a certain extent that I can call Barta'a, because I have been going there since the mid-1980s. I've seen people develop their businesses. I've seen young people develop, get an education, get married and have children of their own. And I welcomed the opportunity of being able to do this with you today, because it gave me the chance, after 3 months of Corona, of being able to reconnect with my other family. And thank you for that opportunity, and I certainly hope that this will whet your appetites to want to come and to join Ari next year, and for me in person to meet you and to take you around.